Welcome back to part 2 of our Christmas program. Again, I'm Ranger Jake here in Union garb in the front of the Visitor Center at Kennesaw Mountain National Battlefield Park. And for this part, we're going to briefly go over kind of the Civil War camp and what you may have seen in winter quarters on the outskirts of Savannah in 1864. So, first of all, I will start with the overall. What we have here, we have a piece of white canvas draped over a cross log that is being held up by 2 forked sticks. And this creates a very crude shelter that the men called shebangs or pup tents. The term pup tent was kind of an inner joke amongst the men that said that these tents were not even fit for a dog. Okay, so they were pup tents. Very simple to set up. This tent actually, I've got it set up for 1, but this would often house actually 2 people. And sometimes, if you tatted it just a little bit bigger, it would be 3. Now, on the inside of the tent, again, this is just a small A-frame tent. On the inside, I have a rubber blanket. This was a prized possession to any Union soldier on the Atlanta campaign. And what that is a piece of heavy canvas that has been painted with rubber, vulcanized rubber, with some grommets on the outer sides. Now, this was very prized because, as you can imagine, rubber makes it waterproof or very water resistant. The men would use this as a poncho. They could use it as a ground cloth, as I'm doing here. On top of that is another item that any infantry soldier never went anywhere without, and that is their wool blanket. Now, it's fairly cold out here. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 38 degrees. It could have been colder in some of the cases, and this would have been most of what their bedding would have been. Now, I am wearing a greatcoat. This might have been a luxury that not all the soldiers would have had, but it could have been an extra layer for warmth. Now, hanging on the crosspoles, and hanging on this crosspole here, I have a black sack that looks like a satchel. And that's essentially what it is, and this was what we call a haversack. This is where the soldier would have kept his food, his rations, things like that. Now, right next to that is a small greenish box. Would have been an old, this is designed to be an old ammunition box where they would have kept cartridges or other rounds for their weaponry and everything. And now, many of the times, the soldiers during camp would have used it as a table, which is what I have here. So as the soldier setting up in here, you would have had, I've got a small metal can or metal pot here with a fork that could have been my dinner, very meager dinner cooked over a hastily made fire, and a rusty tin cup, which most soldiers tried very hard to keep these cups. You have a nice hot beverage, coffee. The Union soldiers did have, when available, coffee issued to them in their rations. I forgot to mention going back to inside of the tent here, you may have seen a deck of cards. I've got a deck of cards in my hand. Cards and other small handmade games were very popular for the men when such boredom, if they were stuck in winter quarters for a length of time. Okay, when they weren't always fighting, and when they were stuck there, having these ways to occupy their time was very popular. Now, the final section, the final position of our, the final item of our camp is this strange-looking tree. And what you'll see at home is a tree, kind of a twig here, that has got some things hanging off of it. And so what we have hanging off of it is we have these squares. You see these kind of yellowish squares, yellow and whitish squares. These are pieces of hardtack. These were the MREs, or the meals ready to eat of the day for the campaigning soldier. Okay, these pieces of hardtack were essentially extremely hard and, by this point, very stale crackers. Okay, they were popular because they were cheap, easy to make, and it took them a long time to go bad. So they were a staple of the Union soldier's ration. Now, next to that, you'll see kind of this misshapen yellow square here. Now, this might gross some of you out at home, but this is a piece of salt pork. Okay, this is a dried, salt-cured piece of pork. Now, the reason it was so heavily salted is to keep it from going bad in the field. The men needed to have a bread and a meat ration. Okay, now, the reason you may be asking, okay, Jake, I see what's tied to this thing, but why? So it kind of goes back, we'll zoom back into letting the soldiers' voices speak for themselves. In doing some research for our program, we found kind of an interesting tidbit. And if any of you that are listening back at home have been overseas, then maybe you can relate to trying to make it seem as much as home as possible during the holidays when you may be feeling a bit lonely and separated from your loved ones. Alfred Bellard of the 5th New Jersey in talking about some Christmas traditions in the field, writes, "In order to make it look much like Christmas as possible, a small tree was stuck in front of our tent, decked off with hardtack and pork, in lieu of cakes and oranges, etc." John Haley of the 17th Maine wrote in his diary on Christmas Eve that it's rumored that there are sundry boxes and mysterious parcels over at the Stoneman Station directed to us. We retire to sleep with feelings akin of those children expecting to see Santa Claus. So you can see from those two accounts that this, what may appear to be sad and kind of like a Charlie Brown Christmas tree to us at home, is kind of a soldier's way, maybe even tongue-in-cheek, but also a real way to make it feel and get as close to home as possible. And then the other gentleman writing about the rations that could be in the sundry boxes near the station, that as children expecting toys at Christmas, that extra rations and just thoughts of letters and food from home was enough to make them feel excited, like it was Christmas morning. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and sign off. Again, this was a Civil War Christmas. My name is Ranger Jake, and from the folks here, from the Rangers, from the volunteers, from everybody here at Kennesaw Mountain National Battlefield Park, we hope you enjoyed the program. We hope you have a happy and safe holiday. We thank you for sticking around to our virtual programs, and we will see you when you get to the park. Thank you.